everyone. You're listening to the RAS Project. My name is Ivan Temelkov, and I'm your host. On this podcast, we discuss entrepreneurship, personal development, family, tech, and marketing. This podcast is for those of you who are looking for life-changing advice and ways to thrive digitally with your business. And as always, all content is 100% real, raw, and unfiltered. Today, I have another special guest on the podcast. And if you've been following the podcast, you will know that I don't just bring anyone on the podcast. I'm excited to have David Tao from BarBend.com. How's it going, David? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here for this real and raw conversation.
Absolutely. So as we were kind of chatting before we kick things off, I was talking about the real and raw format because, one of the things that I've seen in the podcasting world is just there's too much scripting. There's too much, hey, follow the path and don't, veer away from it. And I feel like that loses the human element. I feel like that doesn't have a really personal touch to it. So let's go ahead and start off with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and, what led you up to BarBend? Let's talk also about that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Kentucky, central Kentucky to be specific. So a little bit of my background there, a bit more of a rural upbringing than where I live now. I live I'm coming to you live from our office in Dumbo in Brooklyn, New York. So bit different there, but in college, always thought I wanted to be a journalist. So that's kind of like what I wanted to pursue. Ended up doing that for a little bit, but then was quickly kind of pulled to more of the entrepreneurial side. Worked for some content startups, particularly in the wellness space. Was a content consultant for a number of years. So I spent a couple of years working one of those jobs where I was consulting for all these big companies that were trying to do content or make content a part of what they did. And I was on the road for like more than half the year and just bouncing around from convention to convention, from location to location. Got a little tired of that, to be honest. Just felt worn down and ended up kind of reestablishing roots in New York. Met my business partners actually on a consulting project we were doing for the University of California system, their university system. And I had this idea for BarBend for a while because I love strength athletics. I was a strength athlete myself for a while. Fitness is a big part of what I do in my lifestyle. And I really wanted to start this resource for strength athletes and strength sports and for people who might just be interested in getting into strength training for the first time, but wanted a professional outlet for that. News, video, podcasts, op-eds, training advice, you name it. And so we kind of kicked around the idea for a while. We came up with the name. It was kind of like in a stroke of, BarBend, that's perfect. I wonder how much the URL costs. It was only $3. No one had it. And that was almost 4 years ago. So that was in, around March of 2016, we launched and bootstrapped for a while, ended up raising a round of seed funding around a year in, became the official media partner of USA Weightlifting, which is a sports governing body in the United States. Since then, we've worked with all sorts of brands and governing bodies in strength sports. We were one of the official partners to live stream the CrossFit Games in 2019. And we've grown our staff. Now we have editors, writers, videographers, graphic designers. We have the BarBend podcast, which we launched last year, which is grown a lot quicker than we thought. And so right now we're a resource for all things strength, and lucky to be doing what I'm doing, but the road was very circuitous. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And I want to latch on to that. First of all, congratulations. It sounds like you've, fucking skyrocketed overnight from what it looks like. And that's amazing. I get very excited when I see entrepreneurs kind of find their rhythm and their groove of something that they're really passionate about and just completely skyrocket. So let's talk about that. A couple of things I want to ask you is, were you always entrepreneurial? Like at what point, was it like you woke up and you're like, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur?
I think I never thought about being an entrepreneur professionally until after college. But I think that I was always the kid, even in middle school or high school, where I would like start new extracurriculars. Like there'd be an extracurricular activity that I would see at another school or I'd hear about and we didn't have it at my school. So I would start that. I'd like go to the principal or like the PTA and get funding for it and be like, oh, let me use this classroom. And so I was always doing that sort of thing, right? I was always like starting extracurriculars, but I didn't identify that as entrepreneurial. And I didn't think that I wanted to be an entrepreneur until well after college. I thought that I wanted to go be a reporter for an established magazine or publication, which is initially what I did, right? I wanted to be like, work my way up the chain at one place. I wanted to, start working for like a Time magazine and work my way up from staff writer all the way up to senior editor by the end of my career. But what I really loved doing in high school and college was starting extracurriculars and starting new things. And it took me a while to come to the realization that like, oh, maybe that's going to be a part of my career. Maybe I don't want to slowly work my way up the totem pole at an established legacy publication. This also happened to be at the time when magazine journalism and print news was like really on the downswing. So, wasn't looking like there'd be much of a future in that 10 years ago. So
Sure.
It was also kind of like jogging me, being like, okay, what's the reality of this? Those positions that you always wanted to work your way up the ladder for, they may not exist by the time you get there. Let's be honest.
Okay. Very cool. Well, the reason I was asking the question is just that, I'm always curious of how people start, right? Because there's really, I think, two different kinds of entrepreneurs to say is the ones who are very passionate about something, like they've always had this drive about, hey, I want to do something, extraordinary, and then there's the people who are like, hey, entrepreneurship is the next best thing to sliced bread. So let's, be a fucking entrepreneur and go out there and create whatever, a front face on social media, and I'm an entrepreneur, right? Because in the reality of things, that's the two different types of entrepreneurs. So like, that led you up to BarBend, right? Like you showed interest to entrepreneurship, and you knew you wanted to do something. You were always involved into extracurriculars. How did that come together, the whole BarBend thing?
Yeah, like I said, I was really into strength sports, and even when I was no longer competing in strength sports, I always wanted like news and analysis, and I wanted one place to go. And as social media grew, more people these strength sports were growing. The growth of CrossFit made weightlifting and powerlifting and strongman more popular, but there wasn't this central resource, and I was always looking for it. And I thought, it's got to be out there. I'm just not finding it, but it really didn't exist. So then I started thinking, well, I've helped some media companies in their early stages. Maybe I should just found one. And it was when I met my business partners, and we were able to kind of pool our resources and our different bodies of expertise, when I was finally like, oh, okay, now's the time to pull the trigger. Because I had worked for startups before, right? I had worked for early stage companies, but it was, you have to find that perfect storm of the right idea and the right resources, right? Because I think everyone's got really good ideas. I think most people in their lifetime can come up with like $1 billion idea. It's all about the execution, and oftentimes getting it off the ground is the hardest part. Like, do I have the resources? Yeah. Do I have the time? If you're working in an existing job, right, to support yourself or your family, or you have these other responsibilities, like how do you go full bore and really devote yourself, mind, body, and soul to a new company, to an early stage company? It's tough, and not everyone. That opportunity doesn't just come across the table for everyone, right? You have to do, it's a combination of working to create that opportunity and having a bit of luck. In my case, it was meeting my business partners and finding those resources.
Yeah, and that's an excellent answer. In fact, I was actually about to ask you, and I would love for you to elaborate a little bit further on, what lessons would you advise other entrepreneurs that are just really getting, deeper into, like you said, most people have $1 billion ideas. In fact, everyone's got ideas. The problem is nobody really goes for the implementation, the execution. Right. Nobody really, has the follow through. Nobody has the persistence, to say, I'm going to get the fuck up and change my life, and be so devoted and committed and passionate and persistent about it. So what advice would you give, to others that, have this maybe $1 billion idea, or they've been in the entrepreneurial space? Like, what have you learned in your own journey?
Well, sometimes it's going to be a slow burn, right? Like, you mentioned earlier BarBend as an overnight success. I really don't see it that way. We've had a lot of growth in the past few months. Like 2020 has been a great year so far for BarBend, but it's almost 4 years old. And we had periods where it didn't feel like we were growing at all. And it was more about, can we keep the company sustaining itself so that we can get to a point of more rapid growth? Some companies, they are Facebook or Snapchat, and they take off overnight and they grow, and they're, massive billions of dollars companies. But sometimes a company has a lot of potential. It will go through a period where you're like, wow, growth is really coming slow, or growth might not even be existent right now, but we got to figure out how to keep the company going so we can get to that next level and we can get to that opportunity to grow. So sometimes really good companies with a lot of potential will go through a period of very slow growth or no growth that is just going to happen sometimes, because there might be factors beyond your control, and you just have to kind of weather the storm to get to that next opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the slow burn, because I think there's a lot of people out there that don't understand that entrepreneurship is a marathon.
Yeah.
Either way you look at it, whether you start a brand or you take this wild idea, which to most people it's a wild goose chase run, and then you kind of run with it. It's nonetheless it's a marathon. In fact, most people that I've talked, such as yourself, they'll say, you know what? I mean, you could go 4 or 5 years and never really gain any traction. You can even go 10 years and not gain any traction. It just really depends on a lot of different things. It depends on the market. It depends on your idea. It depends on your follow through. There's just so many different dependencies. And that's exactly what I'm hearing from you. It's kind of like, after you hear things so many different times from so many different entrepreneurs and successful people such as yourself, you kind of go like, oh shit, maybe there's this constant here that entrepreneurship is a long-term endeavor, when in fact that I think, in this digital world that we live in, like if you were to look on Instagram, there's all these self-made gurus, taking pictures with the Lambos and this and that. But the reality of their worlds is nothing like it. Right. It's just, so I'm glad that you talked about that. Let's talk a little bit about, technology. What part has technology, played in your business and just as a whole?
Well, it's interesting because I think from the outside, what we do seems a little bit low tech, right? Because, we're just a content company. We produce stuff on platforms. We're not building YouTube, right? We put stuff on YouTube. We're not building Apple Podcasts. We put stuff on Apple Podcasts.
Sure.
Technology for us isn't necessarily about reinventing the wheel, but it's about optimizing, right? So SEO is very important for us. Showing up in search rankings is very important for us, and making the site usable is very important. So for us, the technical element, and we're very fortunate to have a fantastic in-house technical team. It's more about, okay, can we optimize what we have? Can we be best in class for that user experience and on these platforms? Because if you have a slow website, it's going to impact your rankings. People aren't going to want to come back to it, right? So no, we're not developing cold fusion here, right? But we do need to constantly keep up to date with what are the best practices, how can we improve that user experience. We're constantly tweaking, constantly planning redesigns. It's a never-ending process, and I think you can't really think of it in phases anymore. You can't think of it as like being complete anymore, because it never really is. Construction's always happening.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I wanted to elaborate upon that because, optimism and positivity and pivoting are so important in entrepreneurship and from a business standpoint. And you just mentioned that, the website, the brand is a constant work of art. It's a constant work in progress, I should say, where, you're just building on pre-existing layers, and it's like building a skyscraper, basically, to hopefully one day you kind of reach the top, which you may never reach that top because you're constantly evolving. And I think also another thing that you talked about there is relevance to the marketplace, and how important that is, because you talked about search, you talked about visibility. And as someone who has, strong background in that, I agree now more than ever, because you got to have that visibility. You got to have that, provide the discovery to your end users, because if you don't, they're not going to find you. They're not going to have that experience. Let me ask you something else. With BarBend, obviously, in the fitness and the health and wellness space, there's just so much competition. What have you found with BarBend that has helped you really grow as a brand?
Yeah, I think the fact that we can be authentic. We're for strength athletes, or people very passionate about strength athletics, for people who are passionate about strength. We are people who have experience in this. We eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. We don't just love writing about it. We love doing it. We think it's for everyone. So the fact that it's part of our lives, and it was part of the life of everyone on our staff, even before for most of the people, pretty much everyone actually, before they started working here, it allows us to bring that level of authenticity because it's something we all were involved in even before it was our day job, right? And people understand that, and they can see that.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I was asking that question is because I always am curious about, how people perceive their brand and what makes them unique, what makes them more authentic, because, the fitness space specifically in health and wellness, is growing massively right now. In fact, from what I've been hearing is there's this huge shortage for trainers, fitness trainers. And, there's this huge untapped opportunity. Problem is a lot of people are not jumping on that. So you feel like you guys are kind of filling in some of that in terms of education and community?
Yeah, I feel like we are filling a need. There's a desire out there for both community and content, and I think we're touching upon both. I think we can definitely do more to touch upon the community aspect, and I think we can do a better job of that. But yeah, I'd say we're definitely working to fill those gaps.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So what's next for BarBend? I mean, what are you guys looking to do in 2020?
We are looking to grow more cross-platform, so investing heavily in video and podcasts. Obviously, written is what we're very good at, and we will continue to produce great content there. But expect more podcasts under the BarBend brand, as well as more video series under the BarBend brand, and some cool partnerships with other media outlets.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, David, I mean, this has been an absolutely amazing conversation. I truly enjoyed learning about what you guys are doing. Sounds like you got a great thing going. Before closing, how can people connect with you out there if they want to reach you for a convo?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, for BarBend, it's easy. It's barbend.com, and we're at BarBend on most social media platforms. Personally, I'm D_Tao on Twitter. That's D_TAO. And then on Instagram, I'm at David Thomas Tao. So you can reach me on either of those platforms as well.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me today.